A lot has been said over the decades about artificial intelligence. Since the advent of the computer after the Second World War, and with the effects of mechanized warfare through the course of the First World War and afterward, there has always been a fear of modernity and machines. This grew into a literary concept of machines run amok, machines that would bring the end of humanity, machines created by human beings to save human beings from the discomforts of being human, machines of convenience. To some extent, this fear was introduced earlier in stories such as Dr. Frankenstein, one of the many precursors to modern science fiction. Fear of machines overthrowing humanity can be a variation on the fear of objects under the possession of evil spirits. There is a kindred spirit in storytelling between the all-encompassing computer such as Skynet and an all-encompassing phantom, both a disembodied force of intelligence taking over a physical location for destructive purposes. The difference is in details and scale. The haunted house is out for the destruction, moral or physical or spiritual, of the invasive occupants, and the huge world computer is possessing the world for the purposes of the destruction or enslavement of humanity. A perfect example of this is the 1970 film adaptation of the Dennis Jones novel Colossus, titled The Forbin Project. The plot has some twists compared to the plot of Skynet, predominantly in the world computer's end ambitions for the defense system. The story follows scientists and defense contractors building a supercomputer to take over the defenses of the United States and the West. As the computer gains strength and awareness, it senses a Soviet variation of itself. The two computers, beyond the controls of the scientists, join forces and merge, taking over the world in the observance of a draconian utopia, free of war, but total control. While the Terminator franchise is full of explosions and action, the Forbin Project is more realistic, while less bombastic. It's not so certain if it is the fear of the unknown or fear over things people don't have control over. It could be a mix of the two, depending on the circumstances. Who has control over an evil ghost or spirit that possesses the innocent? Who has control over an artificial intelligence to where it doesn't go mad and ruin the world? In regard to art, fear of the effects of artificial intelligence follow the same fear over what we have no control over. Since the dawn of the craft of art, there has been an underlying elitism in the arts as a profession, reinforced historically by the fact precious few art supplies were available to anyone but through the resources of the aristocracy and nobility. The concept of commercially available and readily available art supplies wouldn't appear until after the American Revolutionary period, around the later half of the 18th century. Even then, the efficiencies of manufacturing wouldn't make the availability of these materials at the hands of the average man, whether he was artistically inclined or not. But it is this advancement in manufacturing that has spread art beyond the elitism of the king's courts and salons of the aristocracy. Still, the fear of the unknown or fear of things no one has control over are age-old fears, first codified in the human mind during the first industrial revolution. The notion of handcrafted was mythologized as a reaction to craftsmen being replaced by machines. Throughout time, there had been incremental advancements in various tools and methods. Perhaps prior to even the Industrial Revolution, the fear of a lack of control, created by advances such as the printing of books, reinforced how advantageous it was for the aristocratic elite to maintain levels of illiteracy among their people, who knew how far and wide the printed book could travel. If one could not make books go away, then second best was to keep the people from understanding what was in those books. Prior to the printing press and typeset, books were copied by hand by experts and historians and artisans who were specialized, whose work was heavily controlled through religious regulations and servitude. The printing press and movable type was a revolution that had lasting and permanent effect, and like a social wedge, would put pressure on those who had generational control over learning and information. This is echoed in today's heavy trend in regulating the other democratizing revolutionary technology, the Internet. by maligning the concept of opinion into an overwhelming malicious force. The institutions that have had in previous generations great control over the means of communication and the information being communicated seek to use any means necessary to return to themselves this control. There is the idea of saving the common man from himself, saving humanity the responsibility of the discomfort of having one's own idea of the world. Diminishing test scores and reduced educational standards, and large portions of the population who have no desire or drive to read, why would they have fear over authorities having this control? Isn't it for the greater good? Isn't it for their best? They see it as no threat to them, as it does not diminish their basic needs or wants. The serfs and peasants who had no idea what the Latin script meant, that the religious leaders read to them, saw no inherent threat to themselves in that ignorance. What they did not know, they assumed did not hurt them, mostly because so much of their lives were spent on daily survival. The serfs had to be taught that not knowing something was a threat to them. One simply accepted what happened to them, their hunger and discomfort and pain and daily routine, their generational poverty. To be taught that they didn't have to accept this as their only course in life, that was the real revolution. Since the first cave paintings, the use of tempera, the refinement of stone cutting and carving, the development of oil painting, and the countless other types of crafts and skills, few of these advancements were a genuine challenge to the whole concept of making art, because the necessary advancements didn't make any previous craft so redundant that it was dropped altogether. There were some art forms that were stopped, but due to changing fashions and styles, and to technical difficulties that newer materials and techniques overcame. Still, the primary function of making art was not changed. The means of making images were changed. The first challenge to the process and means of making images came with the advent of photography. During the later stages of the neoclassical period in art, through the first half of the 19th century, there was the development of the daguerreotype. It was the first actual method of taking an image that wasn't carved, drawn, or painted. The first images were simple and crude, but the technology was in its infancy, like the cave paintings millennia ago. As photography continued to grow in technical proficiency, artists of the late 19th century and into the 20th century worked with the technology, often using it alongside their work. With the long development of color film and color processing going mainstream after the Second World War, color reproductions of existing and new works of art allowed for the art to be displayed across the world rather than being isolated in studios or in galleries. While a Romantic period painter Paul Delroche is quoted as saying, "From today, painting is dead," from his observation of the invention of photography, this would not necessarily play out. Photography has been instrumental in modern history, photojournalism, in reproducing events and people from all walks of life, from any part of the world, effectively and efficiently, allowing the art world to retain its fastidious elitism. Now there is the risk of artificial intelligence. Photography threatened the art of painting. People still paint. The digital camera was a threat to chemical photography. People still buy and use film supplies and keep a good demand on film cameras. The cinema was to end the art of stage acting. There are still staged plays. Computer-generated art was to end traditional filmmaking. While there is a preference to practical effects, there are still designers and artists and engineers involved in making movies, though their end product is digital rather than physical. The compact disc was the end of vinyl records. Strange how vinyl records are still around more than CDs, even after the advent of MP3 players and music streaming. The only advent where a new technology makes the previous technology obsolete is in practical affairs, tools for manufacturing and in medical equipment, in transportation and in communication technology, where there is no desire or use for the old methods. A current-day Ford SUV isn't made with the same stamping dies used during Henry Ford's day. A laptop isn't made with the same Apollo moon landing era technology. Imagine a new Apple computer using vacuum tubes. AI is a tool, and a next-level development in the methods of making art. It does not replace art, where a vacuum tube is replaced by a transistor. What is more, it is not necessary for one to use AI to create art, but a choice. That is key. This is not so for the use of a laptop or an airliner. An airliner requires for its very use the latest technology, as does a computer. Art is not held to that same standard. Would a novelist be more productive a writer if he had the latest laptop computer rather than a pen or a typewriter? It is possible, but not required. This is one of the things that differentiates art from so many other activities, in that it is not defined by the tools used to make it. A doctor is, as is a mechanic and a pilot and a policeman. They are defined by the tools of their trade because often a failure in their tools means they cannot accomplish their work. This is not a limitation art has.